Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for August the 16th, 2016. Here we have 98L out in the eastern Atlantic. Strong tropical wave that came off Africa in recent days, developed a weak area of low pressure at the surface. It's trying to consolidate in what is basically a fairly hostile, dry environment, and no MJO assist. In other words, no Madden-Julian oscillation, which is just a fancy way of describing the upward motion in the atmosphere. And you can see that with the exception of 98L here and some convection trying to come off Africa, this whole area over here is convection free. What is convection? Thunderstorms, upward motion, like all this over here. That's thunderstorm activity, and you just don't have that right now out in the eastern Atlantic. So that this is developing at all is interesting, and if it further develops and becomes a tropical storm, it would be called Fiona, and we'll talk about where it might be headed. This is an animated satellite picture, infrared, but just no colorized cloud tops, just black and white. And you can kind of see here, definitely has a counterclockwise rotation in the lower levels, trying to band together and consolidate. But all around it you have this very dry air, part of the Saharan air layer intrusion, and a big piece of it right here, very dry, trying to get, well, it's not trying, it's being ingested into the system. Looking at it from a vorticity standpoint, kind of like looking at it from an X-ray perspective, if it had bones, so to speak. This is what it would look like. The energy starting to bundle. It's a little bit oval-shaped still, but it's not all strung out, and like this, looks like a tadpole over here in the Pacific, for example. This is starting to come together just a little bit more. The upper level winds are also quite favorable. I can't say enough about how those of us who track these things appreciate the University of Wisconsin's Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies team to come in and color code this with green and yellow and red to help really define the areas that are favorable for development and those that aren't. And clearly this region right through here, favorable for this thing to develop further. Upper level anticyclonic flow, you can see that right there. The flow around that going clockwise, or what we call an anticyclone in the northern hemisphere. And they're called that in the southern hemisphere too. They just go the other way, for what it's worth. But anyway, this system coming into an area of favorability overall, except for this right here, the Saharan air layer. Now, down here, just to the south of that dusty, dry environment, and this is really in the lower to mid levels of the atmosphere, where you have this warm air kind of sandwiched in between the boundary layer of the ocean, above the ocean surface, and the stratosphere, way up high. And so instead of the atmosphere being colder as you go up, you get this layer through here where it's a little bit warmer and thus more stable, kind of like an inversion. And you get that over the Great Plains. The tornado chasers call the atmosphere being capped in that situation. It's like there's a cap put on it, and you can't pop convection up through that cap until it breaks. It gets eroded away. And in tornado chasing, that's a completely different area and parameters that we look at than this, but the principles are generally the same. The atmosphere has this lid on it with this Saharan air layer, and yet this is still trying to develop. Over Africa, more impulses coming along that we'll have to watch. Some of the computer models developing several of these over the next few days to 10 days plus. We'll see how that works out. Where might this be headed? Well, the fact that most of the forecast models do hold on to this system for the next 5 days shows that it should go on to develop. How strong it is remains to be seen. Leaning a little bit more this way than going that way. If you've been watching, of course, this is the first time I've been able to show this because we didn't have this yesterday to speak of. But the models are just a little bit trending more west. Don't want to get, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, like what to look for, but it was sort of a lineup like this, and now it's, I don't know, maybe I'm making too much of it. Basically, the longer this takes to develop, the farther west it might track. That's all I'll say. Let's go back to this slide real quick. All the Saharan dust up here and dry air, if this gets choked off, I mean, look, it's already between, what is this, 30 and 40 degrees west longitude. Let's say that it is still sitting at roughly this latitude, between 40 and 50 west. Maybe it's gained a little bit up here. So the models want to take it out like this, generally, into the open Atlantic. But if it comes along more west and gets under the western Atlantic ridge, well, yeah, we'll just wait and see. Don't always assume they're going to turn out to sea. This probably will, but until it does, it's still definitely worth watching, put it that way. The intensity guidance, all of the available models here indicating that this will become a tropical storm. Earlier runs had this going on up to become a hurricane. I think this is showing us that the dry air intrusion could be a problem, that it's kind of leveling out as a moderate tropical storm. Still interesting to see, since it's over the main development region, and that area has struggled so much over the past few years. We'll see if this can sort of break that pattern. So why is the MJO unfavorable right now? Well, generally speaking, the upward motion is confined over here to the western Pacific, or what we call phase 6 of the Madden-Julian oscillation. This is the ECMWF, or the Euro rendition of that, and you can see the forecast for it generally keeps it over here in phases 5 and 6 for the next 2 weeks. This would get us out to almost the very end of August. If this MJO pulse were to come over into phases 8 and 1 especially, these are the phases where we see more activity in the Atlantic. So you can see that not even any of these yellow ensemble members, nor does this sort of envelope of overall ensemble groups bleed over into the Atlantic just yet. So we'll have to see. And interestingly enough, the GFS actually agrees. Sometimes you'll see it wildly swinging over here while the Euro is hanging out almost in an opposite direction. So it's kind of a weird situation. We have this developing, trying to under sort of this capped scenario, and what I kind of worry about a little bit, I just want to share my thoughts on this, my insight, if you will. Let's go back to that map there. Again, let's say this struggles to develop and it gets much farther west, and then it develops over here instead. Totally hypothetical here. It's not as likely to just go out to sea. All right, so we'll have to wait and see about this. And these other tropical waves that are coming along, if they too struggle to develop and they get farther to the west out here instead of developing and curving out, they could be something to watch. So in the coming days, let's see how fast this system 98L does in fact develop, and maybe it struggles long enough that it becomes more of an interest than it already is. That's all I'm saying. Not trying to spook you. You don't ignore these systems and assume that they're going to go out to sea. Most of the time they do, which is evidenced by the fact that we live along the coast of the United States with relatively few hurricanes. If they all didn't go out to sea, people would live about 100 miles inland or have these huge walls built to protect from storm surge or whatever. You get the point. We won't ignore it. All right? Have a great rest of your Tuesday afternoon. As always, thanks for tuning in. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com, and I'll be back with you again tomorrow afternoon.